A knife like this will 30-40 minutes sometimes, depending if it's in bad condition. If it's fairly new and in good condition, then they can be really fast, like 15 minutes. My record was about 8 hours, though I had a very nice knife that was severely damaged, and that was not fun. Hello everybody, Albert here with Seattle Edge in collaboration with How to Sushi at SUIKA restaurant in Seattle. Today we are going to be doing a knife sharpening video covering sushi knives, the Yanagi sushi knife. Hello everybody. Sharpening is a very important part of knife maintenance. When you have a properly sharpened knife, your knife will perform much better for the long term, and it's going to hold an edge much better, and your food will also be cut cleaner, which is very important for both taste and for presentation. So before we can start sharpening, we have to know what sharpening is. So knife sharpening is different than honing or stropping. When you're sharpening a knife, you're actually removing blade steel from the knife, and our objective is to remove that blade steel evenly from each side of the knife and to get each side of the blade to meet in the middle and taper into nothingness with no interruption. So before we can do that, we have to employ the core principles of knife sharpening. So those core principles are movement isolation, consistency, inspection, and patience. Patience perhaps being one of the most important, because if you start getting frustrated and you start getting rushed, you're not going to be able to do a good job. You know, you're going to get frustrated, rush, your technique is going to go down, and you're just going to be wasting time in blade steel, because you certainly can't put that back on. So before we start sharpening, it's very important to inspect the knife, and I've got a 210 millimeter Yanagiba here. So this guy is a right-handed knife. So I don't just want to jump into knife sharpening. So let's go ahead and take a look at this knife. I want to take a look for any edge damage. Are there any cracks or chips that I'm going to have to remove? Am I going to have to thin the blade at all? I also want to take a look for any major curvatures that could create a problem during the sharpening process and in the cutting process. So if I do have edge damage and chips and cracks and things along those lines, I'm going to want to use a more aggressive sharpening stone. So as far as the sharpening stone particles go, the lower the number of the grit, the sharpening stone grit. So say this had serious damage, I may want to start out at a 400 grit. That has a very large aggressive particle that is going to be making contact with the blade steel. Now, to create a more refined edge, I'm going to want to move up and go to a finer stone. So a 1000 grit stone is going to be finer than a 400 grit stone, and the higher the number of your sharpening stone, the smaller the size of the particle. So say a 1000 grit size particle on your sharpening stone is going to be considerably larger than a 6000 grit sharpening particle, which you're really starting at that point to begin to polish the blade. Now, every sharpening stone, you're going to be removing a very small amount of steel, even when you get up into the 10,000-15,000 grit. And what really makes a difference in an edge being fine or aggressive is those particles that are making contact with your cutting edge. So the larger the particle, the deeper the trough cut into the blade steel, and that is called your scratch pattern. So the larger the particle size, the more steel removed, the deeper the trough, and as you start moving up in fineness, the smaller the particle, reducing the size of those larger scratches left by a more aggressive stone. The further we go up, the less the size of those scratches, the cleaner cutting the knife. As far as how far to go up in size, that really depends on the individual's preference of how and also how the steel reacts. There's no right and wrong answer. That is entirely up to the individual. Now, before we begin sharpening, I also want to do a disclaimer. There are many, many different ways to do the same thing. The method of knife sharpening that I'm going to be doing here is one of many. So I would implore you to do research, experiment with different things to find the method that works the best for you and the knives that you own. Okay. So what we have here is a 210 millimeter Yanagiba. This is a right-hand ground knife, and I'm just going to be focusing right along the cutting edge right here. Some people will sharpen the blade completely flat, focusing on this entire area. I personally like to focus primarily along the cutting edge and raise this is called the shinogi line, only when the blade needs thinning. Some blade steels in Yanagibas and high detailed knives like this are very hard and they're a little more prone to chipping. Focusing along your cutting edge can help provide a little bit more structural integrity. So this knife has a defined cutting edge already, but it is not sharp. So because this knife is very thin and carbon steel typically reacts very quickly to the sharpening process, I'm going to be starting out on a 1000 grit stone because the knife is in good condition. I'm not going to need to go any lower than that. So what we're going to be doing is essentially I'm going to be going back and forth holding the knife in my right hand the whole time. Now, while there are two sides to this blade, with a single bevel knife, you want to spend the majority of your time on this side and not on this side. Reason being, this is actually hollow ground right here. And it's hollow ground for a reason. So if I spend the majority of my time going back and forth, just sharpening here, this is going to end up being flat. So we do want to preserve this nice hollow grind so that the knife can cut cleanly and have nice food release. Okay, so I'm going to start here with the heel and then move all the way up the tip. We do want to sharpen the entire cutting edge. Thankfully, we don't have a bolster here, so that will allow even steel removal during the sharpening process. Okay, so I'm going to use this hand right here essentially as a brace. And this is the movement isolation that I was talking about. I need to isolate movement in my wrist. And my other hand here helps keep the knife stable and also maintains even pressure when I'm sharpening. And this helps keep steel removal nice and easy. Okay, all right. So I'm going to do most of my passes on this side. Now, when you bring each side of the blade together, you will get something that is called a wire edge. And the wire edge is very, very important for you to develop, because if you do not develop a wire edge, your knife is not going to be able to get sharp. Now, there's two things that must be taken into consideration with the wire edge. First is its creation, and the second is its removal. If you have a wire edge that has not been removed, even if your knife is hair-splitting sharp, if that wire edge has not been taken off, then you are going to have terrible edge retention. So that's what I'm doing right now, is I'm pushing back and forth to try and feel the wire edge with my fingers. Now, the wire edge is a very tricky, unforgiving beast. So it has to be created, but it also has to be removed. Using finer stones, finer grit stones in specific passes, which we're going to see very soon, will aid in its removal. Okay. Inspection is one of the very, very important parts of knife sharpening. I can see I'm just barely touching it to try and feel that wire edge. I'm almost there. I want to keep my Waterstone nice and hydrated. This is a Sharpen Pro. It's some of my all-time favorites. Now I just need to focus on the tip here for a moment. Okay, so I think we've got a wire edge. Now in the beginning, I'll only do a few passes along the back of the blade. Now sometimes you can feel if a knife has been brought together by dragging it along a nail. See here, right there, it's really grabbing. Okay, so I'm going to do a few more passes here. I'll just reach right in my water trough. It's very important that you not lift too high as you get towards the tip, as you can round the tip, and that tip is there for a reason. Okay, still feeling. I want to make sure I've got it from heel to tip. Okay, just do it on a very light, very light passes. Okay. Yeah, now it's really grabbing, and that is exactly what I want. We want that from heel to tip. That way we can get clean and even cuts. Okay, this knife is done for the 1000 grit stone. It's time to move up to a finer grit stone and reduce our scratch pattern. Okay, so we've finished with the 1000 grit stone, and it's time to remove those larger scratch patterns that have been left by the 1000 grit stone. So we're going to be moving up to a finer stone. This is my 3000 grit Suihiro Serax stone. I've been very happy with it. I find it does a great job at refining an edge and helping create a very clean cutting knife. So we are going to be going up finer than this, but I want to make sure that I have decreased the size of those scratch patterns from the 1000 before I move to a finer polish and grit stone. So, and one word on stability. It's very important that you be nice and stable while you're doing this. So make sure that you're either doing it sitting down or that you have a nice and stable base with to be able to stand on. Something that helps create stability, because if your body is moving all over the place, you're not going to be able to give that knife the consistency of movement isolation that it needs to be able to get sharp. So I'm actually going to go ahead and do the same thing. We're going to start right about here. Now you notice essentially what I'm doing is I'm pivoting like this. I'm moving back and forth. That's really what I'm doing. I'm letting my tools do the job. My job is to act as an angle guide and to give the knife the movement that it needs to be able to get sharp. Okay? Always inspecting, no rush. Now, since this is a Waterstone, I want to make sure that it is nice and hydrated, and what we're seeing here is called a slurry, which is a mixture of the sharpening stone particles, blade steel, and water. Slurry can help create a nice mixed sort of multi-directional scratch pattern. I find with some stones a slurry does an excellent job at helping keep a knife sharpened very well. Okay, now this is looking a little dry, so I'm going to go ahead and spray some water on there. The main reason I'm not using this water from the water trough is because there are 1,000 grit particles inside this water, and if I were to just splash them back up, I would interrupt the polishing process by introducing larger particles. Movement isolation, moving up to the tip. Let's do a few light, very light, just enough pressure to keep things even. That's really all I'm doing. The more pressure you use while knife sharpening, the more steel you remove, and sometimes the larger your wire edge. Now remember, we have to remove that wire edge, so the larger it is, the harder it can be to remove, and that can be very, very frustrating. Inspecting, feeling for my wire edge. Now I know I've created it because I created it with my other stone, but what I'm doing now is working it back and forth. And when I'm working it back and forth, that lets me know that I am making full contact with the entire cutting edge on every stroke, which is what I want. Because if I'm missing areas, that means I'm not polishing or cutting in my bevel correctly. Now, instead of going back this time, I'm going to be going in totally perpendicular at a 90-degree angle, watching my fingers, especially on this heel. And this is a pass that's great because it helps remove your wire edges. So I typically do that just once or twice. Let's go back for another one. Nice slurry on there, keep things nice and even. Let's do another pass. Very light. Yeah, it's definitely grabbing my skin. Okay, I think we're ready for the next stone. Okay, and we've got my 5,000 grit stone here. Once again, reducing the scratch pattern. Let's keep things nice and consistent. Very, very smooth. Starting to get a really nice and pointy point. Exactly what we want. Very, very light pressure. See, now we're starting to see a shine here, and that highlights our hollow grind that we want to maintain. Let's keep this stone nice and wet. We don't want it to dry out. That'll interrupt the polishing process. I'm going to maintain about this 20 degree, 15 degree, depending on the knife angle for a micro bevel. Now, the level of polish that one should take their knife to, like I said earlier, is completely individual. Some people prefer a more aggressive edge, some people prefer a more refined edge with smaller scratch pattern, less micro teeth. It's not that there is one right and one wrong answer. This is why I encourage you to sharpen your knives and, more importantly, use your knives and discover which you prefer. One of the most unique things about knife sharpening is that each knife responds differently to sharpening stones, to sharpening methods, because each steel is different. Each steel has strengths and weaknesses, and that's up to you to decide which ones serve your needs the best. Once again, still feeling for my wire edge. You're not removing much steel when you get into grits this fine, but you're still removing it. You can see that is a mixture of steel, water, and your stone. They're just not in these big chunks. Okay, a little more water on there. Nothing more frustrating than messing up a knife right before you finish it. So I'm just doing a few final passes on a very old 8000 nanowatt S1. The reason I have this at a 45-degree angle is because I've thinned and sharpened on this so many times that my stone base actually sticks up above my sharpening stone, and I don't want to be whittling away a bunch of rubber. Very light pressure, very light. Okay, so stropping can be a very important part of knife sharpening, and it can make your job easier. It's imperative for razors, but it can help with the knife sharpening process. So stropping does two things. It will help refine and align your cutting edge, and it will also help remove very stubborn wire edges. Now, working with a single bevel knife, you have to strop this a little differently than you would with a normal double bevel knife. So when you're just getting your sea legs, stropping a single bevel knife, I recommend lying the blade flat on the strop and then just pressing down like that. So now what I'm doing is I'm only making contact from here, the shinogi line, all the way down to the cutting edge. But I'm going to be able to move back and forth because I have sharpened at an angle right here. So what I'm going to do, very lightly, lift up, move ever so slightly back and forth, and when you feel it catch, it's getting ready to bite into the leather, so don't press hard. And just draw backwards like that to the tip, and then roll up and lift away, making sure not to roll up into your fingers. Now, to do the other side, since we've only been lying the blade totally flat on the stone, we're not going to want to lift up, because if we do that, you're going to place opposing pressure to this side and end up hurting your the back side of your blade. So slide off. These tips get really, really sharp, so watch them. Make sure you don't cut a trough into your leather. I've had this strop for quite some time. It's one of the ones we use at the shop for quick touch-ups. Stropping can also, just from a visual standpoint, create a real nice shine. You don't need to do stropping all day long, just a couple passes on each side. And there we have it, A to Z knife sharpening a yanagi. So remember, when you are sharpening at home, you've got to employ those principles: consistency, movement isolation, inspection, and patience. That is what is going to give you a good edge. Check out that knife before you start. Make an appropriate sharpening stone selection. Employ the correct technique, and you will get a sharp knife every single time. Thank you very much. Hello, welcome to Seattle Edge.
This special edition of tutorial is produced in collaboration with Seattle Edge, a knife sharpening shop in Seattle, Washington. Albert, the owner and a master blade sharpener, offers one of the highest quality services in town. His knowledge and technique have been more strengthened by his dedicated passion and his uncompromising job, and his proud craftsmanship and beautiful works are not only loved by many artists and collectors, but also attract the local chefs and culinary students for a decade.
Well, it all started a very long time ago. My father was a woodworker and a hunter and a fisherman, so he worked with knives and wood chisels, so I was around it from a very young age. He actually built my first crib. And so one day when I was young, probably 8 or 9 years old, my dad showed me how to sharpen an old fishing knife in the garage, and it like totally blew my mind. It was like magic to me. So my interest in cutlery and knife sharpening was really started at that point. And then after high school, I went to go work for a local knife shop. And after much pleading and begging, they trained me on how to do professional knife sharpening. And I was lucky enough to work with a very skilled individual. So then he left and I became the head sharpener there. And then I left and sharpened on the side just for fun, just to keep in practice, basically. Just sharpen my friends' knives and everything I own. And then I ended up coming back to the knife shop and becoming their sharpener once again. And then in 2009, I started Seattle Edge just as a part-time business, just because I missed professional sharpening. Something about it I just like, I always have. And then in 2011, I came to a fork in the road where I could either pursue the career that I had been, working towards full-time and move in that direction, or I saw a glimmer of light in Seattle Edge with the ability for it to grow. So I decided to just jump into Seattle Edge and go full-time in 2011, and I've been doing it full-time ever since. I've been very lucky to work with a variety of people over the years. When I first started Seattle Edge in 2009, I was a mobile business, and I did almost exclusively restaurants. So I would drive up in my car, unload my gear, and start sharpening. Worked with a few different ones in this area. And then when I decided to go full-time and I wanted to open up my shop, I'd always wanted to have my own shop. And then my target market really changed. So instead of sharpening for whole restaurants, it would be individual cooks and chefs that would then come to me, because just due to the hectic, chaotic, element always present in restaurants. So then it was really more of a split. But now as Seattle Edge has grown, word has kind of spread, and because of the chaos of the restaurant industry, people would leave one restaurant and then go to another, and then a seed would be planted. So Maintaining those relationships is definitely important, and it's really neat to be able to work with people from a variety of culinary experience. You know, someone directly out of culinary school to a chef de cuisine that's been doing it for many, many years in, you know, a very classical setting. Well, I would say the main thing with Seattle Edge is not just, you know, being a knife sharpening shop, but it's doing the right type of knife with the right technique. That's the main thing, you know, and that's why I like having a physical location, because when I was mobile, you can really only have one or two different things. So to be able to sharpen the knife, you have to use the same technique really broadly, and that's not what you can do for every knife. So I really always wanted my own shop. I'm a perfectionist, as you can imagine. So that way I have more tools to be able to really use the right type of technique and sharpening method for that knife, and that really brings out the best in the knife. And that's my main objective, is to maintain high quality control. My future goal is to be able to maintain the type of business that I have, you know, for multiple years now, which is really the high QC and target sharpening towards the knife, and to be able to expand a little bit. I'm teaching once again, so I'm working on sort of casting my net a little bit further. I can't really make any announcements right now, but there are some other companies that I'm going to start working with, which I'm pretty excited about. Well, there's a few things that I can recommend towards professional chefs and sushi chefs. One of the main things I think a lot of professionals have figured out is to not let other people use your knives, because they will not treat them with respect, and they will typically do things to your knife that they would never do with their own knife. I've seen very, very expensive knives used to open cans, which will make a tear run down your cheek, especially when you paid a lot of money for something that you really appreciate. So I would say don't let other people use your knives. Be sure to maintain them well. Regular honing and touch-ups is actually the key to knife sharpening in the professional setting, because you're using your knives a lot. You're going to be using them all day long, 10, 12, 14-hour days. So when you maintain your knives regularly, you actually have to sharpen them less, and because you can't put that steel back on, the less aggressive sharpening that you do, the longer lifespan of your knife. The other thing I would recommend is, if you have a carbon steel knife, to make sure that you keep it dry, to make sure you don't let water or acid sit on that knife for extended periods. And I also recommend doing what's called a forced patina on your carbon steel knife, if it's not a sushi knife, like a chef knife or a gyoto or something. And that is to go ahead and apply some sort of acid to the knife, like you can just cut up a lemon or an onion for a general utility knife that will be used for a variety of things in the kitchen, because that knife is going to start reacting anyway. And a patina, when that happens on the carbon steel, it's kind of like us getting a suntan. So that can help protect the blade, and some knives can be very, very reactive, and they can actually leave sort of like a metallic taste on the food product. So if you just go ahead, force that patina, which is going to happen anyway, you can prevent that from happening. So that's what I'd recommend. And thank you very much for watching the demonstration and information about Seattle Edge. I greatly appreciate it, and we'll hope to see you soon. Take care.
The YouTube channel How to Sushi is now collaborating with other creators, restaurants, and companies. If you would like to boost your business and expand your network, as well as sharing your knowledge and skill to the audience worldwide, please contact us from the link below.
Sharpening is a best part. Perfect. Yeah, main thoroughfare right here.
Oh, and the police, the firefighter.
Yeah. Just gives it that more realistic.